Hello, everyone. Debra Prinzing here. This episode of the Slow Flowers Show features two parts, and I want to tell you about them. The first part is a recording of the lecture about the flower farmers, which Robin and I just gave for the Northwest Horticultural Society. You'll be able to see our slides and hear our remarks, as well as hear some of the interesting behind the scenes details on how the book was developed. In part two, I'm thrilled to share a bonus interview I recently recorded with Daniel Sparler. Daniel is a well known horticulturist here in the Pacific Northwest, and we are so fortunate that he served as consultant on the Flower Farmer's book, checking each plant name, species, and cultivar for its correct botanical Latin. I recorded the conversation with Daniel in his beautiful Seattle garden. It's a short one, but quite informative. So let's jump right in and get started.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming indoors on a beautiful day from a beautiful garden. Thank you very much. I'm very excited for our event tonight. You're in for a treat. My name is Lorene Edwards-Fortner.
Hi, Lorene.
Hi, everyone. And I think I was asked to introduce these lovely women because they are my friends. If you look up from their professional CV on paper, you'll find two women whose every fiber is devoted to connecting us with flowers and beauty. Their new book, The Flower Farmers, champions growers and designers. I know we're not all going to give up our day jobs and become flower farmers, but we can channel the experts, we can learn from their experience, there's lots of tips in the book, and we can develop our own relationship with flowers, which is, of course, a way to immerse ourselves in the beauty and wonder of the natural world. Here comes Deb and Robin.
Hello, thank you for being here. I'm Robin, and I just wanted to share my awareness of flowers began about 30 years ago when I moved to Seattle, because I was a city girl until then. And since coming here now, I've learned the difference between a terrarium and a container garden, which I didn't at first. And I know annuals and perennials now. And over the course of the years, I've learned a lot from my partner, Debra.
Well, thank you, Robin. So as Lorene said in the introduction, Robin and I have been collaborating for many years. The publishing company we started called Bloom Imprint was our COVID project, because why not, right? Everybody had to come up with some kind of pivot during COVID.
Some people bake bread. We started a publishing company.
Yeah. We were invited by Abrams to produce this book, The Flower Farmers, and we knew we were the best people to do it, because all we do is tell stories about flower farmers, showcase the flower farming lifestyle through the lens of what the consumer is interested in doing. So tonight we're going to introduce you to some of the 29 North American flower farmers that we profiled in The Flower Farmer.
Two of which are in the back here.
And Riz is here, so yeah. 3 of them.
Oh,
here.
3, right, yeah. 3. So we like to say, when we were looking for a way to describe the opening of our book, we came upon this phrase, dirt welcomes everyone. And it's true. It doesn't really matter who you are, how old you are, how much money you have. The dirt welcomes you. $5 packet of sunflower seeds, a little water, sometimes a little misery because it doesn't always turn out like you had expected. But it just welcomes you, and it greets you, and it gives you something beautiful back.
So we also every year work together on a forecast for the slow flowers industry, and we were really struck by this data that came out right around the beginning of COVID, which, and many of you have probably heard about this, nearly 20 million new people picked up a trowel and started gardening during the pandemic, and that was really impressive to us. A lot of them, the data was that it was a lot of men. And young people. And while there maybe have been a few people who did it for 1 year and said, that's okay, I don't need the $65 tomato, or whatever that book was called. There are truly, the numbers of the ranks of people. Gardening is huge, and we see that as a doorway into growing cut flowers. This is how we work. I come up with an idea, and then Robin workshops it for me. And I kept saying that, these flowers, and I've said this since the 50 Mile Bouquet, that flower farmers are like, top chefs. They're like, the culinary rock stars.
And I said, no, it's so dated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't say that.
Yeah, so she's got me off of that and have me talking about influencers. And it's truly a great term, because in our world, it's so visual, and in the floral, gardening and floral, everybody's on their phones, on Instagram these days, or on YouTube, and learning through the visual medium. And our flower farmers that we were drawn to highlight in the book, many of them have incredibly impressive platforms. One of the ones we want to tell you about is Brianna Bosch from Blossom and Branch. She's outside of Denver in Colorado. She has 180,000 YouTube subscribers and more than 750,000 Instagram followers on Blossom and Branch. If you want to get out your phones and follow her, feel free.
Yeah, we won't be insulted, because all of the people we mentioned, you should follow.
Yeah. Brianna is actually teaching gardeners how to use regenerative farming practices on a small scale in gardens. So even though she's a flower farmer, she kind of has a particular niche on YouTube. And one of our other wonderful folks in the book, Julio Freitas, the Flower Hat in Bozeman, Montana, has 118,000 followers. And it's just that, he's a telegenetic. He should have his own TV show.
He really should.
So thanks to social media, even a micro farmer can become an influencer when they share authentic stories and connect with the audience, showing the glamour but also the grit of flower farming. I get asked a lot, how do I know this is a trend? And I hate to use the word trend, I like to say cultural shift.
Or insight, we like.
Insight. Yeah. But both of us talk to the press a lot, and when we talk to the press, we have to have data. And this is the best data that I like to point to, and that is the number of domestic flower farmers is on the rise based on the USDA floriculture census, which comes out every 5 years. Right now, over 10,000 farmers have reported devoting some or all of their acreage to growing cut flower crops, but that number has been on the rise for the last 3 reporting periods. Going back to 2007, it's gone up about 15 or 16% annually, and we know that it's an underreported statistic. There are more than 10,000 flower farmers, because all of us are not on that list. And it really does not matter how much land you're devoting to it if you're growing flowers to sell commercially. So I feel like flowers are in the air, they're everywhere, and it really is due to this tremendous increase in domestic flower farming in all 50 states and in all provinces in Canada.
Well, one of the things about this book is I worked with over 60 photographers across the country to capture all these images, which is a lot. And we'll talk a little bit more about, we have one of the photographers who's in the audience tonight, whose photo's on the cover. But I became convinced that in order to be a flower farmer, you had to have a dog. Because I had more pictures of dogs that I knew what to do with. And at one point I was like, we can't show a dog for everyone. I know they're going to be upset that their dog is not going to get in the book. But okay, you know what's next? Chickens. We'll show their chickens, because if they didn't have a dog, or if they did have a dog, they also had chickens. And then if they didn't have chickens or a dog, they usually had sheep. So we put some sheep in the book. So one of the things, we like to do at Slow Flowers and in Bloom Imprint is we do look at the insights, we do look at that zeitgeist that's out there. So what we've done is we've taken the flower farmers and showed how they're reflective of trends that happen in other businesses and pretty much in all of our lives. So this one we call the family business, because I'm from Philadelphia and we have a big mob scene there. So this is called the family business, and it's called Keeping a Legacy Alive. And this is something where maybe as a kid, you hated having to do the garden. You hated having to do the weeding, cut the lawn, all of that. You wanted to get as far away from any of that as possible. Then you buy your first house, or you inherit some property, as these flower farmers did, and all of a sudden, you have rediscovered the joy and beauty of growing things.
So Gretel and Steve Adams, I met them in 2010 at a national flower farming conference. They were children. They were in their 20s. And surrounded by a lot of middle-aged and older flower farmers, and they were soaking it up. And how they got into flower farming really was because Gretel inherited a house with a little bit of land. And they were working at a farmer's market, and they met, this happens a lot, someone who was growing food, but also had a table of sunflowers. And they witnessed how the flowers were connecting with customers, and how great the sales were,
and more profitable.
Yeah, so they really have now spent the past 2 decades. They're celebrating their 20th year next year, growing cut flowers for Columbus and beyond. They supply some of the largest grocery chains across the state, and so they've got a very large distribution program. But what we wanted to do is, throughout the book, highlight a signature crop of every flower farmer. And this is the takeaway, and this is where, when you dive in to the pages, you can read more about the cultural requirements, when to plant, how to plant, and some growers' tips. We're obviously not teaching people how to be flower farmers, but we're giving you just enough to get hooked. So I want to just mention that ranunculus was the crop that we wanted to highlight with Gretel and Steve. They actually have a separate business called Columbus Flower Company, and they ship their ranunculus across the country to home gardeners or flower lovers like us, but also to flower farmers in regions who maybe can't get ranunculus, harvest them early enough in the season because Gretel and Steve are growing in a high tunnel. This particular variety, on the left, I want to just mention, because we did ask people to highlight like their top favorites. That one is Amandine Purple Jean. Another one of their favorite cultivars is Elegance Bianco Striato, which has kind of a picotee look on the edge, little contrasting edge of the petals. They grow in high tunnels because obviously Ohio is colder than Pacific Northwest. In the Northwest, you would want to plant the corms for spring blooms. Mine are up about that far. But the biggest tip that Gretel and Steve offer is please do not let them dry out. That's the one issue. Obviously, they do very well in sunshine, too.
But I also wanted to point out that I kind of call this the cliff notes of flower growing, because each of these flowers has when to plant, where to buy them, how to water them, and when to harvest them, which are like the 4 biggest questions that Debra always gets, and farmers usually get, and growers get. So the next kind of lifestyle choice we see is what we call the side hustle, flowers on the side, meaning that, it's an investment of time and passion. You have this full-time job that is how you pay your rent and pay your mortgage, but then you decide that, maybe this is something that really speaks to me. So you start and you begin to grow and you begin to expand, and then like the people who we're going to talk about in the back, you kind of have, seedling trays in your living room, and before you know it, you have to get a plot of land.
Well, we're so thrilled that Tracy Yang and Nick Sang Tara, did I say that right, Nick? Oh, awesome. Charnco are here. They brought their peonies. Their farm, they're leasing land in Monroe, and their farm is up in Snohomish County. We were so excited that Nick and Tracy could be featured in the book. They're Slow Flowers members. I've gotten to have them on the podcast. We've collaborated at the Northwest Flower and Garden Festival. What we featured in the book are their winter tulip program, but you'll get to take home some of their peonies. I think they're $20 a bunch for 5 stems. Coral Charm, the hottest cultivar around. I wanted to just mention, though, that we did highlight tulips. I think I said that as their crop. So you want to show the next slide. Our friend Missy Palakal photographed this particular story, and we just loved the photos that came out of Tracy and Nick's planting of tulips, and then I think the tulip photos came from you, Tracy.
Came from Tracy, yeah.
Some of their favorite, I wanted to just mention their favorite varieties that we highlighted in the book. The double early one that Tracy liked is Columbus. The single late is Queen of Night. The peony form is Renown Unique. And then the Darwin hybrids include World's Favorite and Van Eyck. And please talk to them afterwards about some of their, how they grow tulips. They're growing tulips in crates indoors. This is a thing that's happening, a practice, I guess I would say, a practice that's happening with flower farmers who want to extend the seasons and create a revenue source early. So that's why last year in the 2024 at the Northwest Flower and Garden Festival, why you guys had tulips the week of Valentine's Day, because they were growing indoors. So it's really exciting to see that niche happening in the industry, and I'm so glad that they're here tonight.
So this is like something everybody's familiar with, the corporate escape. God, my job is so miserable. If only I could do something like grow flowers, right? I would be happy. But I'd be living the dream. But as we like to say, the farmers that we featured who did leave stockbroking, real estate, etc., have done so, and they're living the dream, and you'll see with this next flower farmer, but they're also living the reality, because flower farming, as many in this audience know, is really, really hard work. And so they are working round the clock. They are taking their business sense that they learned in their business careers and applying it to their flower business. And they make very interesting decisions based on that, and often, in the most cases, very successful decisions because of that background.
So let's introduce you to Abby Madsen. Abby and her husband are...
Dog.
Yes, another dog. Abby and Derek live in Vermont. They were actually in the real estate industry in Colorado, and I think Derek still works it's a multifamily developer, but Abby wanted to get out, and she started researching where they could buy a farm that was near an airport. And she literally found this beautiful historic farm in Panton, Vermont, which is like maybe 45 minutes away from Burlington Airport, and they bought this farm sight unseen. It's an old stone farmhouse. She had been taking some online flower farming courses and started her farm, and she's doing so well. She's opened her second retail shop, which is how she connects with her community. The farm itself isn't open to the public, but they host sunset walking tours and U-Pick and private events for small groups, and they've built a whole lifestyle around it, and they do have a special penchant for Weimaraners. So you can
Yes.
see. And I think there's
the name of the company.
Yeah, and then Diddle and Zin is the name of two past dogs that they've had. So we love seeing how entrepreneurial they are, both in growing and in now having a retail flower shop. And actually, Abby said that she's decided to not do any full service weddings next year, because she ended up having 3 businesses, then the farm, the retail store, and weddings and events. And she said, you know what, the locals, not the destination wedding clients who have lots of money, but the locals who want the DIY, wedding, buckets of flowers to do the DIY wedding, they mean more to her because they're her neighbors and she connects with them. She is growing a lot of annuals, but what she highlighted in our chapter is gooseneck loosestrife, Lysomachia clethroides, and it's a beautiful perennial that, as her lifestyle changes to be more running this retail business, Abby's convinced that perennials will save her life. So this is kind of a thug. It does spread, but she grows it only in raised beds. I think she planted it once, and now it's like comes back every year. But it's a really beautiful perennial for wedding clients, and this variety is Lady Jane. So we had fun talking about that.
Yes, she says it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Who grows that? Anybody? They're all like, no.
They're like, no. So this one is particularly close to my heart, being, a designer and a lover of photography and art, is artistic expression, the art of flowers, which we see a lot with just all of us can relate to, but also with our flower farmers, that a lot of them have chosen it as more of an artistic pursuit. The next person we're going to talk about is Katie Tolson, who lives on Seat-on-Hudson, which is a wonderful area in Hastings-on-Hudson in New York. And actually, Katie's background, she was trained as an art appraiser, and she has a background working with the top auction houses in Europe and New York. But when she started growing plants in her small garden, she realized, this is what I always should have been doing. So she actually left the art business and began growing flowers. And she was fortunate enough that a friend of hers let her put a high tunnel on her property. So she grows in her backyard, and she also grows on this large property that is right on the Hudson River. It's very beautiful. But what Katie's also doing now is she was a ceramicist. She studied some of that in college. So now she started to throw pots again. So now she sells her pots with her flowers, which really makes a great combination.
The cut flower that we highlighted with Seat-on-Hudson is flowering tobacco, Nicotiana. There's several cultivars and hybrids. It's one of those plants that, because she's in Lower Hudson Valley, Katie can harvest later than some of the farms north of her, so she's able to sell every stem she grows of flowering tobacco, and there's tons of cultivars and species that are mentioned in the book. I'll just mention a couple. One is Nicotiana alata. In that particular genus, she grows lime green, grandiflora, sensation, and crimson better. And then the other two she wants to mention are Nicotiana langsdorffii, bronze queen, and lemon tree. And these are all in the book, so don't feel like you have to write them down. But what she's doing is growing something very delicate that is an art supply for florists. And so she's able to harvest late into the season and supply all those Brooklyn and New York florists who want something very fragile, ephemeral, and fleeting, especially for weddings and events. She's very successful with it.
Yeah. So the next thing we see is what we call seeking solace. Finding yourself and healing in the garden. Healing through flowers. It's a natural, right? Talk about revitalization. That's what every spring is. It's rebirth. And so we've had many flower farmers who have had issues in their lives that they've had to deal with, whether it's been loss of a family member or an illness, and they've chosen to heal through growing flowers.
So we really want to highlight our friend Misty Vanderweel. Misty's in Palmer, Alaska, outside of Anchorage. She did speak at the Northwest Flower Garden Show the last couple of years. You can almost always count on her escaping from Anchorage in the winter and coming to Seattle. Her farm is called All Dahlia'd Up. When we started working on this book and talking with 29 farms and saying, well, we want to highlight your featured flower, I'd say almost everyone said dahlias, right?
They said dahlias. We said sorry, you can't have dahlias, because we have a flower farmer whose title is All Dahlia'd Up. So we have to give it to her.
Yeah. And that's really fun because, of course, the magical effect of the light in Alaska, she claims, and I believe it because I've seen them in person, they are much more robust, those beautiful blooms, the colors are more intense. It's all, even though she has only a 120-day growing season, everything's enhanced by that 22 hours of light. The purple dahlia is kind of Misty's signature dahlia, and all of her paths to flowers came because she had a child who had a rare form of muscular dystrophy, and he died at age 21. His name is Luke. And Luke had given Misty a little potted dahlia from like a kindergarten project, planting project, and it was purple, and she'd never grown a flower before like that, and soon realized that dividing the tubers every year and replanting them allowed her to keep her son's love of purple dahlias with her whole life. So it is her signature flower now. She has a lot of, this other category that we've also identified in our analysis is called floral tourism. And, you know, you go to Alaska to see a lot of glaciers and go fishing and maybe go up to Denali and see the wildlife, but there's nothing like going to a dinner on a flower farm, which I've done once, and I'm going to go back this summer, and that's how Misty is developing an expansion to her business, selling to obviously local weddings and event customers and everyday customers, but creating these special events like you see on the left of these farm dinners in her beautiful property.
And the last one we're going to talk about this evening is called Experts in Their Field. And these are flower farmers, one of whom is Riz still here. Did he leave? Oh, yeah, Riz is here. We're going to talk about Riz in a second. We admire them for their expertise. We yearn to learn their techniques. We want to glean their knowledge. You know, we want to ask them all the questions that will make our flowers better. But no matter what, they will always be the experts because they are so good at what they do.
We were really thrilled that Riz Reyes agreed to be in the pages of the Flower Farmer. He's not a traditional flower farmer, which is really nice. We've tried to show different paths to flowers. We've got a couple high-end wedding and event designers in the book who also grow some of their flowers. And I would say Riz kind of fell into that niche of gleaner, garden gatherer. His designs are garden and nature inspired. He is a horticulture, botany expert, and you all know him. Like Riz told me the other day, he could have made an arrangement for me out of the weeds at Heronswood, and I believe him. So, but we highlighted Riz's work kind of with that eye of a forager, obviously foraging with permission and not doing anything illegal, but through his relationship with various botanic gardens. Ironically, he has permission to go harvest everywhere he used to work. So CUH, McMinimans. Am I telling secrets out of turn, Riz? Okay. Oh, there you are. And of course at Heronswood. So we scheduled the photo shoot with Amber Fouts, who went with Riz to CUH and Bay Natural Center. And just in the dead of winter, they harvested. He harvested and gleaned and made a beautiful arrangements. The ingredients on the left are some of Riz's own photography. But I love this quote from him in the book. He said, "It's just natural for me to turn debris into a design rather than tossing it into the compost pile." And we wanted to have that encouragement for readers who maybe are never going to grow a traditional row crop, but who can maybe see their garden in a new way as the source of ingredients for their floral design. So Riz talks about, how to find ingredients, how to glean and collect and use dried products, use pods and seed heads from nature, and pair them with things that are about to bloom for his compositions.
So we wanted to talk a little bit about behind the cover, because we feel always, for all of us, inspiration is very close at hand. And people, when they pick up the book, they ask us about the cover. So I wanted to share a little bit of the background about this cover, because it was a bit of serendipity and grace of how this came together. And actually it was two graces. One was my granddaughter, Grace Callan, who's in the audience, and the other was a photographer, Mary Grace Long, who was also in the audience. And what happened was, the cover they sent us, you usually don't get to pick your cover. They get to pick it. You give them some, all your photos, you edit them down, and you see what they pick out. We didn't like it, right? We said, it's not gonna work. So I sat down, and I went and I re-edited, and I pulled out 4 different images, specifically one of Mary Grace's, to look at. And I had these up on my computer screen in my office, and my granddaughter Grace walked in and said, points to Mary Grace's photo. She didn't really know that was Mary's Grace. and the hellebores with the pink, and said, Nana, that's the cover. And I said, oh. She said, well, do you think they'll make it the cover? I said, well, let's see. I hope so. So we'll send it in, but I can't tell them what we prefer. I just have to let them pick it, because they go through all these marketing machinations and everything instead of just instinct, like Grace's beautiful artistic eye that said, that's the cover. So they came back and said, you know, we really love that cover with the hellebore and the pink overalls. And we're like, great, we think that's a good choice. So that's where we ended up with this cover, with Mary Grace's beautiful photograph from the Jello Mold farm up in Skagit Valley. Mount Vernon. And then there's a little history here with this Mount Vernon flower as well.
Well, I asked Robin if she would put the 50 Mile Bouquet on this final slide, because many of you know that book. It came out in 2012. It kind of started my whole writing and reporting odyssey with documenting the renaissance of domestic flower farms. But the flower farmer on the cover is Diane Sukhavati, co-owner of Jello Mold Farm, the farmer on the right. She's depicted with a florist. This photo was taken by David Perry. But we think we've gone full circle, because Mary Grace Long photographed Jello Mold for specifically new original photography for the Flower Farmer's book, and their hellebores and one of their workers who happened to wear the right colors.
Instagram ready.
Yeah. Yes, Instagram ready, exactly. Yeah. Mary Grace, you must have been thrilled when you saw that. Then now they're on the cover of this book, and we love the connections that we've made with our local flower farmers, and that kind of illustrates it.
We're at the end now. We're going to take a few questions if you have any. We want to say thank you, and Debra wants to say a few parting words.
Well, I just want to say that there's nothing more satisfying and more deeply rewarding than enjoying flowers through the season. Everyone here knows that. We feel like this project taught us so much. You think you know everything, and then you get into these deep conversations with wonderful people who are opening up their stories, and it becomes relatable because they're humans, and everyone has some kind of universal connection through flowers. But we believe the best flowers are the ones you grow yourself. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. So if you have a few questions, we're happy to take them. Yes?
When I was first introduced to, the 50 Mile, I thought that was sort of like sacrosanct, but it sounds like you're saying domestic flowers. Mm-hmm. So a florist who's bringing them in from other parts of the country still isn't going to meet the 50 Mile, but would still qualify as being within your genre?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know if you've heard it, but I'll repeat it. She's asking about the book that I just referenced, The 50 Mile Bouquet, and I did have an old-timey California flower farmer come up to me early days when that book came out, and he said, if I followed that 50-mile rule, I'd lose 3/4 of my customers. And I was like, sir, it's a metaphor. It's just a metaphor. But where that name came from is that we were seeing, and at the time, Robin and I weren't really connected, and we weren't collaborating, but she was documenting this same trend, which is overall, flowers are echoing what has happened in the culinary world. And there was that 100-mile diet was a theme. And so, yes, we try to focus on local as much as possible. And obviously, all the flower farmers we highlighted in the book are selling to their local marketplace. But then, there are people who live in flower deserts. And they live in parts of the country where they can't get local flowers, and there is a sort of a tag-along trend called American Grown, and that is really supplied mainly by California farms, but also some in Oregon and Washington and Florida who have milder seasons and who can ship across the country. Yeah.
Although I will say there are deserts, but there are people who are growing flowers in the desert, because we actually have a family in this book that grow south of Albuquerque, New Mexico. They grow flowers and they do events, and lavender was their flower that we highlighted. So I think it's really more about thinking local, thinking about how to support your local economy and environment, but also that beauty is local, right? Beauty is regional.
Marilee. Go ahead, you can say.
29. We have 29 growers. 2 are in Canada, and the rest are across the United States. We have 1 in Florida, believe it or not. Florida and Alaska and Arizona and Hawaii. I mean, which is kind of amazing when you think about it. Like Ohio, you go, yeah, that makes sense. Of course, they grow flowers in Ohio. And of course, we grow flowers here. But they are all over the country.
Yes.
How did you go about picking who would be in the book? Did they come to you? Did you go to them?
Well, there's 2 sides to this. There's
Okay,
how
I
we
will
pick
say, his question was how do we choose who to invite to be in the book? There are lots of reasons behind our choices. I founded the Slow Flower Society, so I really wanted to, which is a membership-based community of flower farmers and designers. So for me, I really wanted people who were members of Slow Flowers and supported our movement. So that was one criteria. Robin has some other things to say about it.
Well, I would say that also we wanted to be spread it out geographically as well. We wanted to be diverse in all the different types of people who are growing flowers and making their living from doing that. We wanted to represent them. And then I'd also say the flip side is the photographers, because we had 60 photographers that I was working with, and that's a lot. And it was really a joy when I worked with one photographer on one farm. But, working with all these photographers, so we were working with photographers all over the country.
Okay, the question is, can people actually make a living just growing flowers locally? Yes, they can, but it's hard work. And a lot of the flower farmers that we feature were maybe handing off their farm to the next generation. The Carrier family outside of Baltimore is supporting 2 families through their flowers. It's a mom and dad who are like now in their late 60s. They're handing it off to their son who's in his 40s, who is supporting a family of 6 through flower farming. But they've learned how to scale. They've learned how to sell through multiple channels, and it's an all-family business. Now, Nick and Tracy will probably tell you a different story because these guys have 3 jobs, right? And, Tracy, and also for some people if it's a couple or a family, one member has an off-farm job. And that is actually a national trend of farming in general. Postal delivery or the school teacher or a job that has benefits and can support a family. But people really are pursuing this lifestyle and making it work for them. And that's why we presented these different paths to flowers, because there are some people that it is a side hustle. There are people who've cashed out their 401ks to buy land and start a farm. And, sometimes we advise against that until they go intern and work for another flower farmer. But it's definitely something that is, all kinds of reasons are driving us back to the land. We want to be returned to, our connections with nature because we've been so divorced from it. You probably have a few things to add to that.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I would say that it all depends what your expectations for making a living are. In terms of, when you're switching from a corporate life to a farmer flowers life, are your expectations that you're still going to maintain that certain level and style of living, or are you making a real lifestyle shift in what you want? And there was a story just recently, I believe it was might have been in the New York Times or an online new news entity called the Free Press, and it's about how younger people are returning to the land. And if you look at housing prices and if you look at what they can afford, they're leaving the city life after they've kind of settled down a little, and they're like, you know what? I can go to the Midwest and I can buy a house and I can afford to live there and I can work remotely. So, or I can, choose a different type of lifestyle. So it's something that's definitely going on now. A lot of little things go into that decision.
our question is, what part of the country are there the most flower farmers? Well, if you look at the revenue and stems sold, California still is the largest producer of cut flowers domestically. But that industry is undergoing dramatic changes. Mainly those farms are commercial. They're second and third generation from Italian, Japanese, Dutch, Mexican immigrants, and so they're passing down to younger generations. And the real estate is so valuable that it's really hard for some of those families to justify keeping their farms, because you could sell to a developer and go retire. I would say Washington State is number 3 or 4 in terms of revenue from flowers as a commercial crop. We definitely skew heavy in the book to the west and northwest. But about half of the book is Oregon, Washington, and other western states. But we did try to cover the country. There is a renaissance going on, a burgeoning flower industry in every state, but sometimes it's very small, and it's exciting to watch. The Slow Flower Society, I think like a journalist, not like a business person, right? I didn't have a big strategy. I wrote a book called Slow Flowers that came out after the 50 Mile Bouquet. It came out in 2013, and that really propelled me to start this organization that was based on supporting flower farming and sustainable design. And I sort of feel like Slow Flowers is at the intersection where sustainable design practices from florists and sustainable growing practices from farmers come together. So now we've grown to an organization of 700 members across North America, both in the US and Canada, mostly in the US, but we have 50 or 60 members in Canada, and we just see it as a way for people to use the Slow Flowers mission as part of their branding to telegraph to their customers their values of seasonal, local, sustainable, as well as kind of learning from each other and networking and creating community. I mean, Tracy's created a community of flower farmers just in the town of Snohomish, and there's a small collective now, and they go in together, go in on buying, meeting minimums from suppliers, or they collaborate on events. They buy and sell from each other, and I love seeing that happen all around the country. And I will mention the Seattle Wholesale Growers Market, which many of you have been to and know about, features prominently in this book because several of the farms who helped found the Seattle Growers Market are featured in our chapters. And I brought a postcard with me if you want to grab one. If you haven't been there, you can buy direct from the flower farmers. They're open to the public in South Seattle 10 to 1, I think, every day now. And that is really what launched my whole path in Slow Flowers, was the presence of this little engine that could, this little producers co-op that started in 2011. When customers can meet the farmers and know their stories, there's a higher level of support for local, for domestic agriculture.
Yeah, I just want to brag on you a little though, because I think part of the philosophy is so often in years when I was doing consulting, we talk about sustainability. Everybody's like, do you want to be sustainable? Yeah, I want to be sustainable. Oh, do you buy sustainable products? No, they're so expensive, But what Debra showed is sustainability kind of had this crunchy granola association with it. And what Debra highlights in the stories you do, and what we try to highlight in our books, is that it's beautiful, right? That this isn't crunchy granola, that this isn't, picking daisies by the roadside and selling them. This is actually a very sophisticated business of people making business decisions, and people making decisions, and when they choose florists and flower growers who do this, to add that to any event or their life. So,
Yeah, good point.
So cheers to you.
Well, hello everybody. This is a very special bonus segment. I'm delighted to introduce you to Daniel Sparler. And Daniel has a very special role in the life of the flower farmers. He was our horticulture editor. And is it horticulture or horticulturist? What's the right term?
A horticulturalist.
Horticulturalist.
Mhm.
Okay, horticultural
That's my
editor.
preference anyway.
Okay, so horticultural editor and
Uh-huh.
horticulturalist. You guys, this was so important to Robin and me to make sure that we had complete plant identification in every correct form in this book. And it became very clear that I wasn't the person to do it. I'm a big fan of Daniel Sparler. He has a column that runs, how often do you publish
Monthly
it?
now. At first it was fortnightly, but then that was too much, so
Okay.
I do it monthly.
Monthly, called Horticulturally Yours.
Mhm.
Is it available online?
It is, yes. If you go to the Northwest Horticultural Society website, so northwesthorticulture.org, look on the education tab, click on that, and then it'll give you a link for Horticulturally Yours and all of the archives, 68, I think, of
Oh
them.
my goodness.
Segments.
All right. Well, I'll also share a link in our show notes so you can find it. In addition, you have taught sold out botanical Latin classes in the horticultural world, right?
Yes, yes. Mainly for the Northwest Horticultural Society, but also for some master gardeners groups here and there, and the Bellevue Botanic Garden one time, but mainly for the NHS. So I want to promote the Northwest Horticultural Society in Seattle
And
as
all
one
their-
of all of their
Yeah,
programs.
yeah. And I'm a member. I'm a longtime member,
Yes.
past
Mhm.
board member, and past editor of the newsletter. But we never really worked together because it was probably before you started the
Probably
column.
so. Yeah, yeah.
So, why is it important? I felt it was important because I wanted this book to have, a strong accuracy and credibility in the gardening world. But when people ask you, well, isn't Latin dead, and why is botanical Latin important? How do you defend it?
It's alive. You know, it's kind of mute, but it's definitely alive. I
love that.
It's our way. It can seem to be a moving target.
Yeah.
Because things shift from time to time, but it's because we're, as Thomas Brown said in 1658. He was an early horticulturalist in Britain. He said, we're tracing the labyrinth of truth. And it's a labyrinth, but we're trying to find the truth, and we're tracing it out, and it can lead us down dead ends sometimes. And so the reason that the nomenclature changes from time to time is that we find out more about the plant and how it relates to other plants. And as the world is facing these various threats of extinction of all sorts of plants, it's more important than ever to find out how
gosh.
things are related to each other.
Right. Oh my gosh, it's so true. So it seems like there's a lot happening more in the sort of contemporary times. When you first started studying horticulture names and nomenclature, and I remember taking plant ID classes at South Seattle Community College, it was like, this is it. Memorize it, look at the plant and associate the name with that, and here's why. But maybe I was wrong. I mean, the labyrinth analogy is beautiful. It just keeps evolving. But how do these shift? How do the names shift?
Well, up until about 30 or 40 years ago, the process hadn't changed for a couple hundred years since Linnaeus in the 1750s came out with his Specius Plantarum, looking at ways to succinctly identify and relate all types of plants that were known to science at the time. And so he came up with the binomial set of the genus and the species that we use for plants and animals now. He applied it to plants first and then to animals later,
Oh, I
like
didn't know
Homo
that.
sapiens.
Right.
And he was basing it in the plants on the sexual characteristics of the plant itself, the anatomy of a flower and the seed and the fruit and things of that sort, to find out what's related to each other, and then let's organize them in the best way we know. And that was the top science of the time. But
And that has endured for
the most part, except now we understand that appearances can be deceiving. So DNA is the way to look at it now.
Right.
And so that's why things have shifted and changed quite a bit as we learn more about it through genetics and through DNA.
It's true
That
science.
Things that we thought, true science, things that we thought were closely related are maybe not so closely related, and vice versa. Things that used to be in different species or even different genera now, we're saying, oh, these are a lot more closely related than they appear on the surface. So that's why we have to rearrange things.
Because they might not look alike, and that the appearance was one of the judgments
Correct.
that was made.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Who gets to decide all this? Who are the
International Botanical Congress? The 20th one was just held in Madrid last summer. So usually every 6 years or so, botanists from around the world will get together and hash these things out. There's a taxonomy division that does a committee that does all of the work about revision between sessions, and then presents their findings to the General Congress that either accepts it or rejects part of it. Almost always they're accepted.
Wow.
So every 6 years or so you'll get a different code that comes out that's published after each Botanical Congress, and then that is kind of the Bible for the next 6 years.
and do you subscribe to that, or do you purchase it? How
No,
do you
but
get it?
it's online now.
Oh, okay.
And that's a really wonderful tool. Several of the top botanic gardens in the world, Kew mainly in London, and the Royal Botanic Garden in Edinburgh, the Harvard University Botanic Gardens and Arboretum there, and the Missouri Botanic Garden in St. Louis
yeah.
are some of the top ones that publish online resources. Plants of the World Online, POWO.org, that Kew organizes, and the World Flora Online are two of the, well, those are the unassailable sources.
Wow. I want to just talk about a few of the surprises that came to me in the book, and then I'd like to know if there are a few that you experienced, because I mean, I know that you know a lot, but you probably had to look some things up, right?
I had to look up a lot of things, you know, and especially with my memory, the way as things go on, I rely on authoritative sources a lot. I don't trust my memory.
Okay, but you know which sources
I have
to look
hunches,
up.
and
Yeah.
the thing is, look up everything.
I don't know. The one that surprised me the most was poppy. And this is the chapter that features Three Porch Farm, Mandy and Steve O'Shea. They're in Comer, Georgia. And they are awesome poppy growers and ship poppies and other flowers to customers around the North America, I guess the contiguous 48 states. By the way, this is their dinner on the farm, which I want to be. This is why people buy this book. They have the fantasy that we all flower farmers just live like that. But when we got to the poppy, all of a sudden, Daniel caught our mistake, which I thought, oh, poppy is papaver, and Papaver, which it was for a long time, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, and so now tell me what that word. How do you say that word?
One says Oreomecon nudicalis.
Okay, so poppy is no longer papaver, it's Oreomecon nudicalis.
Well, for this particular one, it's still a valid genus for other species.
Other species of poppies.
Species of poppies, yes.
Okay, so the
Poppy
Iceland...
is that broad term that is a common name, and the Latin term for it was papaver. That's what they actually called it in Roman times, because several species of poppies grew along the Mediterranean.
Oh, right.
And so that name was just taken by Linnaeus, saying, well, the name's already around, meaning poppy in Latin, so let's just take that.
Okay.
And so as a common name, it's very inclusive and broad. But then certain specific things like the so-called Iceland poppies and those have been reclassified.
Okay. And did you know this genus? Like, what else? What are they related to? What is this?
Well, it's in the poppy family
Oh,
still.
okay.
So the broader thing, so the Papaver genus, which is still around for certain things, Mechanopsis, the Himalayan blue poppies and
Yes.
things, the Welsh poppy, which used to be a Mechanopsis, and now it's in a new genus as well.
Okay.
But they're all in the poppy family.
Oh, that's so helpful to think about
Yeah.
Mechanopsis, because that is called the
Poppy,
Himalayan
yes,
blue
Himalayan
poppy.
blue poppy,
Yeah.
or the Welsh poppy, the yellow one that's all over the place, including in this garden.
Oh, well, we don't hate you too much. That's
But
amazing.
they're all in the poppy family.
Yeah.
So Papaveraceae, as most people say.
But I'm so grateful that you caught this, because we want to be accurate, and the fact that you were able to describe to me that this is the correct name. I can't think if there were any other specific issues like that in the book. Do any other come to mind?
Well, part of it is so many of the annuals are complex hybrids that it's difficult to tease out exactly what the parentage is botanically. So I remember the Celoseas sometimes.
Oh, right. Yeah.
In that, is it a subspecies that we're looking at for some of the ornamentals? Is it just a selection? Do you know where that chapter is?
Yeah,
We can look at
that is also in the South. That is Farm Gal Flowers outside of Orlando, and we'll find that with Eileen Tongson, this chapter. And Eileen, of course, celosia are happy to grow in Florida.
Yes.
Unlike here in Seattle.
So
Were
again,
minor-
they have complex parentage from tropical zones all over the world. So some in Latin America, some in Africa, some in Asia, and so they're all cultivars now. A
Okay.
cultivar is just a selection from a species called Celosia argentea or argentea in Latin.
Okay, right. And so then you did say, or you helped us write this, plume and crested celosia forms are cultivars of Celosia argentea, properly placed in groups, and then there were the cristata group, the plumosa group, the spicata group.
Yes, and in the past you would see sometimes cristata as a species, so Celosia cristata or Celosia plumosa, but those aren't valid species names.
And actually, I
They're
think
just groups.
I had those in my manuscript,
Well,
and you
that's
caught
what a
it.
lot
Yeah.
of a lot in the trade. That's how they're often labeled.
The other thing that you did a lot that I appreciated is you would say the genus and the species, and then you would say cultivars. No, or you say that, yeah, you say cultivars and maybe it was just called cultivars.
Well, they're hybrids and they're cultivars.
Hybrids and cultivars, yeah. And I felt like that just helped the reader who's really serious about finding the source of the plant accurately well, here's an example. Delphinium, you have species and hybrids because there's just so much breeding going on
Yes.
still. Is that
Yes,
why?
Exactly. Yeah.
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 How did you get involved in being so brilliant about this? Like, you weren't born with this knowledge, but maybe you were born with the I don't know, you're wired this way.
You know, I've always loved language.
Okay.
And I think part of it was trying to escape the reality of small town Arkansas when I was a kid and wanting to imagine being somewhere else and speaking like a different type of person, being somebody else.
I
Really.
love it.
And I had some really inspiring teachers in middle school who said, my 7th grade, she actually was a substitute. She was a debutante back in the 1940s. I remember she was a cover girl on Collier's magazine in 1945.
Oh my goodness.
And so somehow she ended up
How lucky for you guys to have her as a teacher.
in small town Arkansas, and there she was as a volunteer coming back to fill in for people when they couldn't do things. And at the end of the year, she wrote me like a full-page note telling me that she wanted me to learn Russian, Spanish, French, German, Hindustani, and Japanese.
And you were like 12 or 13?
I was 12.
Oh my
I was 12. And
goodness.
she knew I had just this passion about geography and about and for language, and was trying to encourage me in that. So I haven't covered all those bases, but I've gotten a fair amount along the way.
Right.
But that had to do then with when I started growing plants about 35 years ago, wanting to know their proper names and wanting to learn about the relationships among them. And I had studied the development of the Spanish language from Latin in the early Middle Ages. So that's how I got into Latin, through the back door that way.
Huh.
So I had some exposure to it that way and just started teaching myself more about nomenclature, the history of it.
I mean, there's sort of it's not accessible. Like, there was no internet for you to look things up 35 years
Correct.
ago. You were having to go to
That's
the library.
right.
Probably.
Yes, yeah.
But the love of language made botanical Latin just like another language.
It did, yes.
You weren't afraid of it.
Not at all. In fact, I was eager. I ate it up. I had this eager curiosity about the topic.
And now you have this eager desire to teach everybody about it. and
Well, I
people
just
love
like to
it.
share that method of learning about the plants we love to grow.
Yeah. So when you teach botanical Latin, do people come here to your garden and you just show them a plant and talk about it? Or?
I usually do it at the Center for Urban Horticulture.
Yeah.
So I have a slideshow. I talk about general principles. I make about a 14-page handout of resources and certain basics about how Latin grammar works, why every genus is treated as a noun, and it may be in grammatical terms masculine, feminine, or neuter, which has nothing to do with biological gender at all. Grammatical gender is a totally separate thing.
Okay.
And then how the species is an adjective that agrees with that. So I give them some general rules about that, lots of examples, and then mainly tools, because in a 1.5 hour session, you're not going to teach people everything there is to know.
No.
You can just open the door to learning more on your own. So that's what I try to give people, is tools to pursue it to their heart's content.
Okay, so if I was a college freshman, that would be 101.
Yeah.
So what is 201? When are you going to do the advanced class?
Well, it's really just continuing because it's something that requires any language, especially if it's something very different from what your normal routine is. You have to reinforce it all the time.
Yeah.
You need to come back to it. Repetition, repetition, repetition. So just come back to that all the time. And you can start with the plants that you love the most, or a new plant, or something that intrigues you, about finding out about it, about its history, its cousins.
I love it.
All the various connections there among them.
I find that for someone who is trying to encourage communication between flower farmers and floral designers, it would be useful to have this common language, because there is, unfortunately, speaking of common, a lot of common names that
Yes.
that are mischaracterizing. I mean, the common word for every plant does exist.
Yes.
Why did that happen?
Well, people had to have something to call it, and often it was something very colorful, literally, well, like beggar ticks for a type of coreopsis, things of that sort. So who knows how that comes up? And some of them were kind of corruptions of other languages. They would hear somebody call it something, or especially when in the age of colonization, when the Europeans spread like a contagion all over the world, they encountered new plants.
Without being invited.
Right. They encountered new plants everywhere.
Okay.
They say, "Oh, what's this?" And somebody would say something in their native language, but the English ear to this day still has trouble discerning what that was, and they wrote on a rough approximation, and you might end up with something like horipacoon.
Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! I mean, the research and like you said, if you just studied one genus, you could go take a deep dive and keep stepping farther back in history. And the teaching, I just have to ask you before we wrap up, the teaching part that you love so much is really what your professional life, the path that you took as a professionally, right? Was teaching.
Yes. I taught high school for 30 years.
Wow,
Been
those
retired
lucky
for a few
students.
years now. And I love interacting with people. I love sharing, love learning, and helping people understand it's a lifelong process. It never stops. And I learn something new every day. If I don't learn something new in that day, I think I really haven't lived.
Yeah,
And,
I agree.
Yeah.
So if you see a new plant that you admire on your world travels, are you able to pretty much figure out what its genus and species is? I know phone apps can do some of this work for us now.
Yeah, those phone apps are still not foolproof, and it's remarkable what they can get right, but more often than not, if it's something that I'm stumped by, it stumps the phone too.
Sure. Yeah. And you might have to go to a more academic source.
Yeah, and better now. There's something called the Plant Net, which is various universities teaming together and uploading more and more data. And I think maybe artificial intelligence could help a lot with that too.
Yeah.
That part is still in its infancy about being applied to plant ID apps.
Okay.
But that's getting better. So
Okay.
those things are getting much, much better as time goes on.
Okay. Maybe we need a cut flower plant ID app. But until we have that, you can be guaranteed that all the beautiful cut flowers that our flower farmers are growing have been vetted. And we've been really lucky to have Daniel be part of this project. Thank you so much.
It was a joy for me, and I felt honored to have been included.
Oh, I'm glad you said yes. Anything else you want to mention that I didn't ask you?
Plant with pollinators in mind. I'm going to go do some more of that myself. I planted about a dozen things this morning, and I've still got about 3 dozen. If you look at my driveway, you'll see things that need to be planted. Get your hands in the dirt, listen to the birds and the bees, and stop and smell all the flowers you can.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, Daniel.
My pleasure.
Okay. That was so fun. I hope you learned as much as I did from Daniel. He sent me a postscript in an email after we met together, and he wrote this. It occurs to me that I could have been much more forthcoming and informative about the poppy taxonomy question. You recall I asked him about how the poppy got reclassified. He said this, in case you hadn't noticed, the lexical vocabulary elements of botanical Latin are often more Greek than Latin in origin. Although regardless of derivation, it's all treated as Latin grammatically. Papaver was the Latin word for poppy. In Greek, it was mekon. Hence, Mechanopsis means uses opsis as the Greek suffix meaning looking like. Oreo is Greek for mountain, thus Oreomecon, the new genus for Iceland poppy, means from the Greek mountain poppy. The genus Papaver is still alive and well, Daniel says, containing more than 70 species, although the Iceland poppy has been moved out of it. So, mystery solved, and I hope you learned a little bit today. Thanks so much.